Okay, go for it.
Are you there?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. I'd like to introduce Larry from the United States who has multiple sclerosis. Welcome, Larry.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Could you tell me when you first started to have MS symptoms?
Well, I'm really not sure how far back it goes. It either goes back to 1991 or it goes back to the 1970s. But my first big definitive attack, which wasn't realized for a couple of years, was October of 1998. That was clearly MS. When I was talking about what I was feeling, a friend of mine said, "Gee, it sounds like you're talking about multiple sclerosis." And so I was like, me? No way. How could I possibly have MS? So we found out what was triggering the ultimate attack, and it turned out to be chocolate. And it was an ingredient that I didn't realize would be in a French vanilla coffee. So once I stopped drinking the French vanilla coffee that had cocoa in it, 3 weeks later my symptoms went away, and of course we figured out what it was. I never wanted to hear the words MS or multiple sclerosis again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had 5 attacks in 4 years, the worst being in March of 2002. And I'm not sure, but it seems like that's the attack that left me with the most permanent damage. That was like the worst attack ever. It lasted about 2 months. And if the symptoms that were killing me finally went away, except for optic neuritis, you could pretty much look on any website for MS symptoms, and that's what I was experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going along, and I was kind of just existing. I didn't want to do the crab drugs. I didn't know what else to do. And then
could you tell me what all these symptoms were, Larry?
Oh, well, the worst was bladder urgency. When it came to be around March of 2003, which was about a month before I started LDN, I would say that I was having to run to the bathroom every 20 minutes. And I couldn't ignore it. And of course, when I finally got there, not much came out, if anything at all. If I tried to ignore it, something came out for sure. It was torture. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. I went between my office and home, and I had to time all the bathroom stops. It was horrible. Sleeping was okay. I got a good couple of hours, but still, once I woke up, that was it. That was the biggest torture, and that seems to be the biggest symptom there is. Everyone seems to understand that one.
Mm-hmm. We just had a bit of static there, Larry. I need you to say, oh, crumbs, I kept it in my mind. Never mind. Yeah, forgotten the phrase that we were going to cut in. Never mind, forget it. Because it's going to be edited, you see. I'll perhaps have to come back to you to record that little bit. What other symptoms were you having?
Well, let's see. Restless leg syndrome was a biggie. That's one that stands out. I used to call it little anxiety attacks. And when I was having them, it was like I didn't know if it was fatigue or something I was doing wrong. But it was classic RLS. I just couldn't keep my legs still. And it's funny, I remember while I was growing up, I used to sit at the table either doing homework or eating, and my mother would always yell at me to stop my leg. What's wrong with my leg? Why am I so nervous? What's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm saying that I could have had MS pretty much all my life, but 98 to 2002 were pretty classic cases of attacks. All the years prior were just questionable. But yeah, if it was just mild through that time until it really kicked into high gear, I've been dealing with it for quite a while.
So if you had to rate your quality of life before LDN on a score of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, what would it have been before LDN?
The year prior to starting LDN was like a 1 or a 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I experienced any 3s for any length of time. Prior to that attack, I would say maybe 4s and 5s at that point. But since '98, I don't think I was above a 6 at any point in time. I mean, it was a bad couple of years for sure.
Okay. And how did you hear of LDN?
Well, I'd like to think by total random accident, or somehow, something, some way got me to be where I was to hear about it when I heard about it and how I heard about it. It's a very long story. I don't know how much you want to hear, but basically my computer setup was all taken down because of a foundation leak, and I had decided to set up the computer to check my emails because it was a good couple of days that I didn't have access to anything. So just before finishing up with all my emails, I went into the MS Watch chat room, which was a website back then. I believe it's no longer around. But it's the reason why the name of my Yahoo group is MS Watchers, because I was on MS Watch when I decided to create the group. So I went on there into the chat room, and I wanted to see if there was anybody I knew so I could let them know, to let other people know that my computers were down most of the time, and that I was okay. You know, the MS wasn't too bad, but I couldn't get online. And somebody was there named Steve, and all I saw was LDN. I'm on it 3 weeks, and I'll talk to you some other time. He was finishing up a conversation with someone else, and I said, wait a second, Steve, what's this LDN? So he told me about the LDN, and of course I didn't believe him. He gave me the website, and of course it looked too good to be true. But it just so happened that it was 3 days before my next neurological visit, which is usually 3 to 6 months apart. So I read about it. I talked to him some more. I printed out everything. I brought it into my neurologist, and he said, I can't let you try this. You can't believe anything you read. I've never heard of this before. So I was pretty bummed out. He gave me the videos for all the crabs and told me, pick one, decide which one you want. It's like, yeah, okay. So I brought them home, and I watched all the videos, and I was like, are these infomercials or what? Do these people in the videos actually have MS, or are they just paid to portray someone who's doing really great on their medicine? So I went back 3 months later, and this was January of 2003, to the neurologist, and he asked me which of the crabs I picked that would work for me. So I told him none of them. And he says, oh, that's right. You mentioned LDN last time. He says, well, I'll tell you what. If you find out the protocol, I will consider letting you try it. And then, of course, he tells me not to come back for 3 months. I didn't have a visit until April. So I go back to him on April, and he says, well, have you decided to take one of the crabs? And I was like, no, I want LDN. He goes, all right. Did you find out the protocol? So I told him that I wanted to start with 3 milligrams and once a day, and that was that. He made me fill out a disclaimer saying that I was doing this all on my own and that he had absolutely no involvement. It's against his better judgment, but he was letting me try it because I thought that this is something that had potential. And I left there with a prescription, and I went home, and I was like, okay, now what do I do with this prescription? So I went on to the LDN Yahoo group and asked just that question, and within minutes, Joyce F. replied to me that I should call up Dr. Skip. The next day I called up Dr. Skips, And as they say, the rest is history.
And what would you say LDN's done for you?
Okay, go back to your scale of 1 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the worst days that I've had since April of 2003 on LDN have been no less than a 6, which was consistently higher than my best days in the 2 or 3 years prior to starting LDN.
Mm-hmm.
So that should pretty much cover everything. I did a couple of times feel there were 10s. They didn't last too long, but I've gotten to 9s and 8s and 7s. But for the most part, all the MRIs I had prior to LDN had shown some sort of progression. One was only, 7 millimeters, but still 7 millimeters inside the brain. That's a pretty big stretch. All the MRIs that I've had since I started LDN have showed no progression. They said it was like looking at a picture of somebody who lost a finger. And no matter how many times you take a picture, the finger's still gone. But more of my finger didn't disappear. My doctors feel that LDN may have actually stopped my progression. We don't know for sure, but that's how it looks.
What about your symptoms, Larry? How would you describe those now?
Okay, well, within the first couple of days, my RLS went away. And for the most part, I am not bothered by RLS unless I'm extremely fatigued. And then I will get little twinges of it. But I would say compared to prior to LDN, and I'm talking about decades, the RLS has been totally changed by the LDN. Now, I also have some other concerns about allergies. Before I started LDN, so February or in March of 2003, I went to get my allergy tests redone. I had them done in like 1972, and I had a big list of things I was allergic to. And I figured if I avoided them, then I would do a lot better with the MS. That was other people's opinions. So in 2003, I got a list of allergies, which basically was the same list from 1972 plus a whole lot more. But while I was on LDN, I started feeling differently about things that I knew I shouldn't have been eating. But every now and then I figured, you can't avoid chocolate for the rest of your life. But I started to notice that I wasn't feeling anything from it like I usually do. So in September 2007, I went and I had the allergy tests redone. And I asked them if they were sure that this test was accurate, because the only thing that reacted on my arm for the food part of it was histamine, which always reacts. That's how they know that the test is working. So 4 years on LDN, all of my food allergies, pretty much basically anything I could put in my mouth, lima beans, tuna fish, chocolate, almonds, bananas, a whole lot of other things. I don't have the exact list. I have it in my story, larrytc.com/mystory, has a list of all my allergies and what has disappeared. So that really wasn't good enough for me. September of 07, could be a fluke. All my food allergies are gone. I moved to Florida last year, and last month, May of 2011, I went back and had the allergy tests redone. I am still not allergic to anything that I can eat, and basically the environmentals are the same. I used to be allergic to grasses and trees, and now most of them are gone. I still have some allergies, but none of it bothers me anymore. The LDN just takes care of whatever comes my way.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it? And what about your bladder?
Well, within 11 days, it totally changed it. I have a habit of noticing when I go to sleep. Sometimes I have a stopwatch app that I hit the button when I go to sleep just to see how well my bladder does. Well, I've had some nights where I've woken up and it said 7.5 hours, 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, and I was like, well, my bed's not wet, so apparently I made it through an entire night again. So I would say I don't think I've gotten these many hours of sleep prior to LDN, even before the MS started bothering me. I always had a bladder that filled up, had to go, that was it. But if nothing else, the bladder differences pre-LDN and LDN are amazing just by themselves.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we end, Larry?
Well, I also have another two stories about my dad and my brother.
Okay.
Back in March of 2007, my father ended up in the hospital, and he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. They had told us that he had 6 months or less to live, and they would do chemo. They're not sure what it would do, but that's what their handbook says, chemo. So I worked with a doctor, and we did some blood tests and filled out all the forms and communicated back and forth with this doctor to start my dad on LDN. So he went on LDN, 1.5 for a week just to make sure there was no negative reaction, then 3.0 for a couple of weeks, and then up to 4.5. And I believe every Thursday it was, they did chemo. 6 months later, they did a CAT scan to see how my dad was doing, and they were totally shocked that his tumors had shrunk in half. So because of this, they stopped doing the chemo, because they've never seen tumors shrink in half on the chemo, so they stopped the chemo. They didn't know how my dad would do. You know, they've given him 6 months to live, and that's it. 3 months later, they examine him and they declare him in remission and stable. They apologized to my sister for saying that he only had 6 months to live, because they've never told the family before that someone was going to die that pretty much didn't do just that. And then 3 months later, they did another full CAT scan, and his tumors had shrunk in half again. So he was on LDN now for 6 months only, and his tumors had shrunk in half again. Every CAT scan after that shows the tumors getting smaller and smaller. The last CAT scan that I heard about, they were almost gone. So from 6 months to live, it is now May 2011. We don't know how much longer he has, but anywhere beyond 6 months from March 07 is a bonus, right?
Mm.
Now, because my dad started this, my brother, who was diagnosed with sarcoidosis prior to this and was doing everything his doctors told him to do, his wife decided that I'm on LDN and my dad is on LDN, so he was going on LDN. So they called the same doctor that my dad was using, and my brother started LDN in May of 2007. My brother just turned 60, and he has gone back to playing softball on Sundays, which I couldn't play softball for many years now already. And he's 60 and he's playing softball and he's dealing with the sarcoidosis and taking LDN.
Wow, that's amazing. Before I finish off, Larry, there were two things where we had some really bad static interference, and I need you to say the year prior to LDN, so that can be cut out and put back in where it's an awful screeching noise. And he gave me the videos, the crabs. That's another one.
Well, let's do the first one first.
Okay, yeah. The year prior to LDN.
And the year prior to LDN.
Thank you. And he gave me the video for the crabs.
Oh, okay. He gave me the video for the crabs.
Fantastic. Lovely. So, but the first one, I can't remember what it was because I didn't write it down. If that is it. Oh, yeah, just one more thing. What would you say to other people who are contemplating trying LDN?
If you're thinking about trying LDN, personally, I think you should start at 3 milligrams and see how that works for you. You can try 4.5 milligrams after a couple of weeks or months on 3. and see if that works just as well. Otherwise, you can stay at 3. That's the dose that I'm at, and it seems to be a dose that Dr. Bahari was in his later years thinking could be a better dose than 4.5.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your stories with us, Larry. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, that was very interesting. It'd be interesting to see what you put together.
Yeah.